Welcome to a slightly different Theatre of the Mind. I decided to contact a gentleman called Chris Elston, who is otherwise known as Billboard Chris, because I believe that his story is very special and needs to be told, certainly in the UK. Now, he's very well known in Canada and America and in Australia, but not so much here in the UK. And I'd like to welcome Billboard Chris to the Theatre of the Mind. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you so much. I've been to the UK a few times, and I think when it comes to the subject that I talk about, which is this business of trying to transition children to the opposite sex, I think I have a lot of support in the UK, but this is a topic that for some reason is very toxic, even though we're talking about protecting kids from irreversible harm. And I'm extremely thankful that you're having me on to help spread the truth here today.
A little bit of background, Chris. You're a father of two girls. You're travelling the world, in essence, to expose gender ideology and why children cannot consent to medical transitioning. Have I got that correct?
Yeah, we shouldn't be teaching children that they're born wrong, that they're born in the wrong body. What a load of nonsense. And we shouldn't be giving them drugs, hormones, and surgeries in a fruitless effort to change their sex because of a lie that these children will find true happiness if we do that. There's no basis in reality or truth to any of this. And so I'm having conversations about it all across the world to spread awareness.
So where did the Billboard bit of Billboard Chris come from?
So originally, the first thing I did, and I've been on this campaign for 3.5 years, actually closer to 4 now. I quit my job and everything. But back in July of 2020, in the UK, a woman named Kelly J. Keane put up a poster, a sign at the Edinburgh train station that said, "I love J.K. Rowling. I heart J.K. Rowling." And that sign got taken down. The government-run train authority deemed it to be hate speech. And I had been learning all about this child abuse since 2019. And I got tired of people feeling like they couldn't speak about this issue, like they had to be afraid to talk about this. When children are coming to harm, we should be having more conversations about it, not less. And so I followed her lead and I put up a big billboard that said the same thing in Vancouver, British Columbia. I love J.K. Rowling. It also lasted just a day. A Vancouver politician said it was hate speech and they took it down. I then put up a whole bunch more throughout the US. And then at the end of September 2020, I was stuck in Canada, COVID and all that. We couldn't even leave the country, but none of the sign companies up here would work with me. And I had a vision to start millions of conversations because I know when we talk about this and people learn the truth about it, we'll put a stop to this child abuse. So I did the only thing I could do. They could take down my sign, but they can't take one off my back. So I had some signs made and I wear them. And I know I probably look ridiculous, but I try to offset that by wearing a blazer or something. And I have conversations. I go outside into the real world. I go to university campuses a lot. I go to busy downtown centers. And I've been traveling all over the world having these conversations. I record them. I put them online. It helps to educate other people about this and how to talk about this. And for a guy with a sign, I have to say it's exceeded my wildest dreams how successful this campaign has been. Actually, I did know it would be successful, but I didn't know perhaps it would be as crazy as it is because all sorts of things happen. But I'm just going to keep going one conversation at a time. I know we're going to put an end to this madness.
What do the billboards say?
The main one I wear is children cannot consent to puberty blockers. And then I've got my definition of a dad, which is normally on my backside. And that is my definition of a dad, which is a human male who protects his kids from gender ideology. And I'd have to say that's the most popular one for sure. But my main message is about this medical abuse. This is medical malpractice going on.
How important is it to have a social media voice?
Well, social media is important, but the reason I went out into the real world is because we can't just be on social media. That's an easy way to reach a lot of people. But when it comes to this topic, most people aren't in the corners of X, formerly Twitter, where they're talking about gender ideology. Most people aren't on Twitter at all. And so this conversation was really limited to a really niche corner of the internet. And no one was having this conversation out in the real world. And there were very few men having this conversation. So I felt it was important to get outside to talk to the average guy on the street and I might be seen by 100,000 people during the course of a day with cars driving by and everything. And so I start a lot of conversations that I'm never a part of. But I thought it was important to get out into the real world and reach people from all walks of life,
And
because I know when enough people learn about what's going on, we'll put a stop to this.
and what's been the reaction in the real world?
More than 90% of people overwhelmingly support me. In the beginning, no one knew about this subject. Almost nobody. They would see my sign, "Children cannot consent to puberty blockers," and they would ask me what those were. And now it's totally changed. I can see the change pretty much month to month in the amount of awareness out there. But the support is overwhelming. There is a lot of hate as well, but the hate is honestly limited to probably 5 to 7% of the population, and they're just very loud and aggressive. This is truly the tyranny of the minority, and we give them way too much attention, much more than they deserve. And we really don't need to worry about reaching these angry, violent people. We just need to reach all the people in the middle, because when enough people, especially parents, learn what's going on, we can get the truth out there. And the only way this was really able to spread in the past was because it spread in silence and because people were afraid to speak out. So I think going out in the real world also breathes courage into other people, and they start fighting back in their own way.
For the man and woman on the street, let's cut through the fog. Is this about gender or is this about sex?
This is about sex. Not the kind we have, but the kind that we are. I have this expression: there are two sexes, zero genders, and infinite personalities. Because that just sums us all up beautifully. The left has taken the word gender and they've redefined it to mean something entirely different. For these far leftists, they believe that we have a gender identity. What is a gender identity? I've asked this question thousands of times. Nobody can tell me without resorting to some circular definition, or to some definition that just relies on regressive sexist stereotypes. We don't have gender identities. We have personalities. And if a girl is a tomboy, if she wants to climb trees and kick around the football and chase lizards and ride a dirt bike, well, she's a beautiful girl. Stereotypes do not determine what our sex or gender is, but yet this whole ideology hinges on one thing only: stereotypes. And the funny thing about this is the people pushing this ideology, if you tell them what I just said, that there's no right way to be a boy or a girl, for example, that we shouldn't put kids in some stereotypical box, they'll all agree. But they have this blind spot where they don't see that they're pushing stereotypes to such a degree that they're now advising that we maim and sterilize children, most of whom are suffering from other mental health issues, many of whom are on the autism spectrum, some of whom would just grow up to be gay. A lot of these kids have been sexually abused. There's trauma, there's depression, there's anxiety. There's always something else going on. But at these gender clinics, they treat it as though gender is the source of all these underlying problems. And they don't treat the actual source of this child's distress. And shocker, it doesn't help a child psychologically when you give them puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgeries. It doesn't help a child to tell them that they're supposed to be something they're not. That's abuse, and we need to put a stop to this whole ideology.
We'll get to the cast review in a moment because it was released this week in the UK. I just want to ask a question. Do you think the confusion stems from vocabulary? Because not a lot of people understand the vocabulary that's being used. For example, we talk about trans identity, but there's transsexual, transgender, transvestite. But it's been shortened into one small word that seems to be an overarching panacea for everything.
Yeah, so great point. How many people would brag about having a transsexual child? Not many. That sounds a little extreme. But transgender, this is nicer. It's fluffier. And you get these people who sometimes push this on their kids, virtue signaling how progressive they are. You get a lot of moms in particular pushing this on their children. A former study, back before they started giving kids puberty blockers, but a former study into what was then called gender identity disorder showed that 52% of the mothers of these boys had borderline personality disorder themselves, compared to just 6% of the general population. But, confusing the language is the point. The activists know that if you want to control a population, it's best to confuse them. If you want to push something that's evil and harmful on kids, just confuse everybody, because when people don't understand something, they're less likely to talk about it. So one of the main things I've been trying to do is demystify all of this and talk about this in simple terms, because when people do understand what it is, what's going on, and they know how to talk about it, they're more likely to talk about it. But this was one of those issues, much more complicated than the sports issue, where you've got Leah Thomas lapping all these women in the pool because he's 6'5" and he's a man. And everyone instantly goes, yeah, that's wrong. But this business of child transition, and it is a business, is more complex. These conversations are more nuanced. And confusing the language is a tactic that cults always use. And I do see this as a cult for all practical purposes. It is one 100%. The people in it don't even allow themselves to look at the evidence. They self-police their own thoughts, because if they were to acknowledge the truth, they would lose all of their friends and their social group and blow up their whole belief system. And most people can't confront that. But the truth is, there's no such thing as a transgender child. These are called girls and boys, just like they've always been. And this whole ideology is based on a lie that we have a gender identity, which is just a feeling of what it means to be a girl or a boy. The left has redefined your gender to mean how you feel. So if you're an effeminate male, are you now a girl? That's nuts. And if you talk to gay men, they'll tell you some of them struggled with this when they were younger. And if they were growing up today, as a man in Vancouver so eloquently put it, they would have whipped out the old dick saw for him because he grew up to be a gay man. So what are these kids? Are they trans or are they gay? Well, some of these kids grow up to be gay. I don't like attaching sexuality to children at all, but there's no such thing as a transgender child. We should just accept them as they are. If they're a little bit different, if they're gender nonconforming, beautiful. Just be who you are. We have to get away from this business of teaching children that they're supposed to be something they're not.
We've talked about owning vocabulary. What do you make of companies that are advertising gender reassignment surgery on their cups as a hiring perk?
Yeah, I tweeted that out the other day. Starbucks had this sticker attached to their cups showing that it said, "We're hiring." And one of the perks of being an employee at Starbucks is their benefits package covers gender reassignment surgeries. What can you say about that? This is just gruesome. This is brutal. This is disgusting. And this whole ideology needs to be ripped out at its roots, because honestly, this whole ideology has only been around for what, 60 years? John Money at Johns Hopkins University first coined this term, gender identity, back in the 60s. This idea that we have this gendered soul, which is essentially what it is. This is like a quasi-religion. This theory of gender identity floated around academia for decades, but it really exploded around 2010, 2015. It was like a perfect storm. Gay rights were one, really the first decade of the century all across the West. So then you have all these LGBTQ, 2S, IA+++ organizations, which achieve their objective of winning gay rights. But what do they do then? Do they shut the doors? Do they fire everybody? No, they have to keep the donations flowing. And so the new objective became trans rights. And a lot of people talked about this slippery slope, and they proved to be right. But coinciding with this new movement to push trans rights as some civil rights movement, when really they're teaching this pseudoscientific nonsense, coinciding with that came the smartphone and social media. And all these kids went from living their lives to watching other kids live their lives. And they're online getting exposed to all sorts of harmful ideologies. And the kids who are struggling the most, the ones with autism and distress and anxiety, well, they're the ones who happen to be spending the most time online. And they're coming to this belief that the source of all of their distress is because they were born wrong. And this is a cult, and they're getting indoctrinated. And then the left, looking for the latest thing to virtue signal on, says that they're helping children to be who they really are by cutting off the breasts of children and sterilizing autistic kids. Totally nuts.
Let's talk about the CAS review issued this week. What do you make of the UK putting a ban on puberty blockers? And that's going to be enforced in England. And according to the health regulator, it will take enforcement action against private clinics that prescribe puberty blockers to under 18s. Is that something that you agree with?
Yeah, of course. This whole field of transition, not just for kids but adults as well, there's no evidence to support any of it, including for adults. If you look at the adult population, the best study we have into suicides, and the left always likes to pretend that kids are going to kill themselves if they don't transition, and I'll get into all of this. But even with the adult population, the best study we have is out of Sweden, and it showed that with the adult population, 10 years after sex reassignment surgery, actual suicides, were 19.1 times higher than their peers with similar mental health comorbidities. When you compared them to the general population, it was 40 times higher. So this isn't helping anybody, to be honest with you. But the main focus I'm focused on is with kids, of course. It is a bit of a different conversation with adults, but even then, these 18, 19, 20-year-old young people with autism, with abuse, who've suffered sexual abuse and trauma, doctors shouldn't just be order takers where they hand out puberty blockers or cross-sex hormones like candy. They should be screening for trauma and abuse and looking into other mental health comorbidities first. But none of that is happening. So yeah, this is tremendous. In England, they had already banned puberty blockers through the NHS, but now they're going to target the private clinics as well, because that was really a loophole that was being taken advantage of. So that's big news. Another thing that the NHS just announced after this CAS report came out is that they're going to review giving the opposite sex's hormones to 16 and 17-year-olds, because that is still going on, and that shouldn't be going on either. None of this is proven to help these kids. So they need to stop that as well. And Dr. Hilary Cass confirmed that there is no evidence to support this myth of an epidemic of suicides if we don't transition kids. And just in the last month, we have the only clinical study that's ever been done on this subject out of Finland, where they followed over 2,000 kids over a period of 23 years, and they compared them to a control group of more than 17,000 kids. Excuse me. And over that 23-year span, with more than 2,000 kids who came to the Gender Clinic, most of whom didn't get puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones, but over that 23-year span, there were only 7 suicides. That works out to an annual rate of 0.051%, 1 out of 2,000 kids. Yet to talk to these trans activists, you would think that half of them are going to kill themselves if we don't cut off their body parts. It's all a lie done to coerce parents into going along with this. They're told you can have a dead daughter or a live son. It's the most brutal, dishonest, evil manipulation going on. And it's honestly the only way you could ever justify this level of child abuse. Because how else can you justify stopping a child's development, altering their development, and turning them into anorgasmic, sterilized, lifelong pharmaceutical patients? So the CAS review is excellent. It's having worldwide repercussions. Of course, many of these leftists are doubling down. Many of these leftist political parties are doubling down, and they ignore it all, or they lie about it all. But the people are waking up, and they can only suppress the truth for so long before enough of us learn what's happening and put a stop to this.
CAS review also postulated that no person, organization, or government gets to redefine what it means to be a man or a woman. And in the UK press, especially the Daily Telegraph, they were reporting that children allowed to socially transition face psychological harm. Is that true in your experience?
Yeah, of course. What message are you sending a girl? And this is happening to boys too, so I don't want to just focus on the girls because there's an uptick in boys. But this is really a social contagion that's been affecting girls. And what the interim report had already confirmed, and then this final report did so again, is that the social transition of a child is not some benign intervention. When I say social transition, I'm referring to giving a child a new name and new pronouns. So what message are you sending a girl when you call her a boy? What message are you sending when you use he, him pronouns for her? You are telling her that she was supposed to be something that she is not. That is extraordinarily psychologically abusive. Hey, little girl, we love you, but you're supposed to be a boy. What? This is total madness. You need to change your body to be your true self. This is just pure evil, is what it is. And then you have these situations in schools where they go along with this because this is sold as being kind. We should affirm the child's pronouns. That's what they want to be called. Really? So now you've got every other kid in the school and the teachers and the administrators affirming this delusion that a child is supposed to be something they're not. I don't think that's kind. I think that's terrible. And then because this is being affirmed and reaffirmed thousands of times over the course of the school year, what chance does this child have of saying, you know what, I made a mistake. I was wrong. Virtually none. And so then they go on to the next step, which is puberty blockers and the hormones. And then they progress to surgeries because they're chasing this delusion that they just need to keep taking the next step to find their true happiness. But all along the way, each step, they're not getting happier. And that's what this CAS review confirmed. There is no evidence to show psychological improvement for these children. And other countries who have done these systematic reviews, Sweden, Finland, and more recently Germany, all came to the exact same conclusions as well. So they're doing away with this. All the evidence is there. So why aren't these political parties just looking at the truth, getting the data, and putting a stop to this child abuse? How hard is this? This isn't difficult. These are our most vulnerable kids in the world, and we're treating them as guinea pigs.
Have you had any resistance within social media against what you're saying to people and what your message is?
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, I have every day tons of abusive comments and all that sort of stuff, but I don't worry about that. I don't worry about the haters. I don't think they need any attention. We just have to reach the normies and just keep telling the truth. And the haters can froth at the mouth for all I care and go ballistic. Doesn't matter to me. I'm just going to keep having one conversation at a time with people who don't know what's going on.
What was your inspiration? Was it your daughters or was it injustice?
Well, you know, any parent, pretty much any parent, when you have children, your whole life changes and they become your focus. And when I first started learning about this, my girls were 7 and 9 years old. This was back in 2019. And I see this as a cult. And I know that no child is immune, no person for that matter is immune from cultish indoctrination. So I wanted to learn all about this to protect my own kids. But the more I learn, the crazier this gets. And what can I say? I just obviously I'm very I am affected by this. It doesn't affect my own family, but obviously it's affecting me because I uprooted my entire life to fight this because this is child abuse and it just felt like a calling. I knew I could make a difference. The more I learned, I knew exactly what had to be done. We just had to start a whole bunch of conversations about this and get the truth out there. And I knew I could do that. And when there is such a epidemic of child abuse going on and you know you can do something about it, it would be the very definition of cowardice to then do nothing about that. I don't care what the world says about me. I don't care about my reputation. None of that matters. My wife and my girls know who I am. Truly, they're the only ones' opinions who matter to me. But obviously, as I do this, the vast majority of the population also agrees with me. So we just need to get brave. We need to stop worrying about being called nasty names. And not everyone, of course, can do what I do. Not everyone can afford to lose their job or whatever, but we can all do something. Too often we look for reasons not to do something. Oh, well, if I do that, this will happen to me. That's a load of rubbish. We can all do something. You just have to get in motion. And once you get in motion, you're more likely to stay in motion. And once you do start fighting back, you're more likely to find other people who are fighting back, and then you can work together. But yeah, this just honestly felt like a calling. I had to do something about it. And so that's what I'm doing.
One of the big moves recently was the introduction of Scotland's hate speech. How does that affect what you're doing?
Personally, I think these hate speech bills are kind of hilarious. They're terrible. They're a total violation of our freedoms. But I look forward to challenging them. And J.K. Rowling, I mean, she's the master. She just basically nullified that law on the very first day because I guess it would be a crime now to misgender people in Scotland. But on the first day this bill became law, she wrote this epic thread about 10 violent, unhinged males who now consider themselves to be women. And she challenged the Scottish government to arrest her. And of course, they're not going to do that. She's J.K. Rowling. And the police have confirmed that they're not going to press charges. And she has doubled down by saying if they go after any woman who tells the truth about a man, she will repeat that woman's words and dare them to arrest her as well. So she's basically made this law completely toothless. And other Western nations are trying to push through the same sort of legislation. I was in Ireland last year when a police officer on the street threatened to arrest me if I went near the Disney store because the Disney store had called in a false complaint that I'd gone inside. I hadn't. I'd walked by the store. It's on Grafton Street, the busiest street in Dublin. I'd walked by the store on my way to a camera store because I had to pick up something. And I come out and there's these police. And I said to the officer, I said, okay, please do arrest me. It would be great for my campaign. And instead of being able to intimidate me, that put him on his back foot a little. And I could see a very subtle change in his body language. And he said, why would that be good for your campaign? And I said, well, I've got media friends all over the world. They're all going to see you arresting a man who thinks that we shouldn't be sterilizing children. So please do arrest me. I have nothing to worry about. But he literally told me that I could be arrested for causing offense to someone. He misrepresented Section 7 of their own criminal code. He got it completely wrong. But he was telling me if I offended someone, I could be arrested. I said, that's absurd. I could say that Ireland is beautiful and that could cause offense to someone. Would you arrest me for that? Anyway, I just think that when these people try to push these really what are, fascist, censorious laws, we just have to push back against it in a smart way and challenge them to act on it. Because this, more than anything, wakes up a lot of the population to the totalitarian creep that's going on in Western culture.
We've also had the World Health Organization hire a transgender female this week to advance trans ideology. Are you aware of that?
Well, am I aware of it? Yeah, this is making huge news all across the world. So I wrote a tweet about Teddy Cook. This is a woman. This is a female. She says she's a man now. And she has been appointed to the World Health Organization's panel of 20 so-called experts to draft the policy for the health of trans-identified people. Who is Teddy Cook? This is a woman who has promoted bestiality. On the cover of this Daily Mail article that I commented on was a picture that Teddy Cook had tweeted of a large dog having sex with a man. She is into bondage. She has advised that trans-identified people have better sex when they're high on illicit drugs. Her social media is a constant stream of porn. She celebrates her own mutilation. This is not someone who should be writing healthcare policy for people who are struggling with mental health problems. And that's essentially what I wrote on Twitter. I called her a woman because she is. And I said something like, people who belong in psychiatric wards are drafting the policy for people who belong in psychiatric wards. And that's not an insult to every single person who identifies as trans, especially these children who are just caught up in a cult. It speaks to the entirety of this person, Teddy Cook, the bestiality, the bondage, the drugs, the nudism, all of that. This person should not be writing healthcare policy. But what happened is in Australia, where Teddy Cook is from, they have their own censorship law, and they have an e-safety commissioner. This woman's name is Julie Inman Grant. She's a former Twitter employee. She was director of public policy down under for Twitter before she got fired when Elon took over. And I think she has a vendetta against Elon Musk. So anyway, they ordered my tweet to be taken down. And what's happened is X has blocked it in Australia, geo-blocked it. It's still available. But X is going to take legal action against this order. I'm appealing it myself as well. I'm working with the Free Speech Union down in Australia. And because they tried to censor me, this has just done the exact opposite. And instead of the tweet only being seen 400,000 times, now it's probably been seen 20 million times. So I hope they keep trying to censor me, do it over and over again, because all it does is do me a huge favor and help me reach many more people.
Been an absolute pleasure having you on the channel, Chris.
Thank you so much.
A couple of quick questions, though. Your wife and daughters, do they have the same opinion as you?
Yeah, they also know that children aren't born in the wrong body. Yeah, they're totally sane. My girls understand everything about this. I don't worry about them for 1 minute. If anything, they're a positive influence on other kids, and they push back against this ideology if it ever does come up in school. But no, we're on team sanity, and we know that children are beautiful just as they are. No drugs or scalpels needed.
So, a statement rather than a question to round off, Chris. Is the greatest crime of modernity the destruction of childhood?
Yeah, I think this is the greatest child abuse scandal in certainly in modern history. I've gone back through the history books and I've tried to look up what's crazier than this. And humans have done all sorts of terrible things throughout our history and believed in all sorts of insane things. But we never stopped the development of children, castrating children, creating neo-vaginas in boys as young as 16 years old in the United States, cutting off the breasts of 12-year-old girls because of this psychologically abusive nonsense that they were born wrong. I don't know if there's ever been anything as crazy as this. It's so absurd. It goes kind of to this big lie theory that the bigger the lie you tell, the more it is believed. And this really swept across the whole world with lightning speed. And people think there's legitimacy to it. But the more you dig into it, the more you realize, no, the whole thing is just one giant lie. So I'm 100% confident we're going to do away with this. And we'll look back at this in 10 years and say, what the heck happened to humanity? Just as we look back at the 50s and 60s, the way they used to do lobotomies on people, we're going to look at this the exact same way, except much worse because they're harming kids.
Chris, thank you very much for your time and your insight. I wish you well in Australia and with everything that you're doing. I'd love to have you back on the channel where we can talk in greater depth about what's going on in women's sports and transgender athletes. But for the moment, Chris Elston, Billboard Chris, and you can find Billboard Chris as Billboard Chris on X and billboardchris.com. Chris, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Adrian. See you next time.